Morning, everybody. Welcome to our discussion today on the Black Podcast Listener Report. My name is Corey Gumbs. I'm here with my panel of Rob, Africa, and Bethany, and we're going to be talking about and the Sambaza podcast of the host Steven. He just joined us. We're going to be talking about our impressions, insights, opinions, and just discussing the first ever released Black Podcast or Listener Report from Edison Research. So welcome to the show. If you are on Facebook and you would like to make a comment, make sure you go to StreamYard. I have it here. Just follow the directions there, StreamYard/Facebook, and we'll be able to see who's making the comment. We would love to put your name and face to the comment, so please do that. But I guess we'll get started. Let's go. We're gonna go through the pages, and if anybody has any questions or wants to point out any particular thing, just let me know. So, just to give some background, it was over 2,500 online interviews of Black African American adults 18 plus in the United States. It was conducted in August 2021. And they used the data was weighted to match age, sex, and census region of the Black US Black population and the Infinite Dial podcast listening statistics. So every year, just to give some people background, every year, Edison Research does the Infinite Dial where they just, well, it used to be podcasting, but now they encompass all audio media as well as some video media into their report. So it's definitely a good report to check up on every year just to see the direction that podcasting is going. I know myself every year I wait for it and I download it and I analyze it and try to help me identify where I feel like us as a community need to go as well as my business. So I definitely highly recommend that. Um, does anybody have any particular pages or any particular points they wanted to start off with while we're here?
I just like the fact that this is, I don't want to say that this is the only time that this has ever happened, but it's the first time where I've ever seen any organization doing this level of research on podcasting specifically look at the African American demographic, as directly as they did. They always put, demo info in their report, but it's usually just, African Americans did this, and it is maybe a slide. This report was all about us, which had me smiling from the time that I saw it, come out. I actually did a podcast episode where we talked about it just because it was something that we just hadn't seen, a research company go this in depth specifically to the Black podcast listening audience.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, I also want to say that it is understood how influential Black culture is, but to have the backup statistics and literally the receipts to show how much we trend set, not only in the United States, but globally, and how influential we are. And I am just so honored that we're literally coming in on the ground floor of this because we have the ability as the Black community to kind of curtail how podcasting will be in the future because of our influence just from starting from the ground up. So this was super exciting to me.
I agree. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If you don't mind, if I may add, I think my main thing that gives me a lot of hope is the fact that when you look at what you have on the slide, the U.S. population vis-a-vis the Black population, it's still showing that we're increasing. There's just a slight. I mean, it's 77 by 77, and the rest of the population with the increase at 76 looks like there's something going on somewhere that we're actually coming up. I think if we go through the other slides, we'll probably dissect and get much more information. But at this time, I think to me, I when I looked at this report, I was really happy, and it gave me more insight with regard to how podcasting is in the Black community, and I was impressed. We got hope. There's hope, a lot of hope.
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree. Similar to Corey, every year I kind of look out for this report, and I'd actually started doing weekly seminars specifically for Black podcasters, going through all of the demographics, and like Black and Hispanic was always like 5-10%, and every year slowly started growing. So this year to see them, like Bethany said, dedicated specifically to the Black audience shows that, similar to everything else in entertainment, like we're actually turning the tide and we actually control the conversations that are happening. So this is good to see that focus, and now empowering podcasters to use this data to do things like monetize, approach brands, and have information to actually put in front of them to break that down. So I think this is super important and useful.
I just want to add too. I know Rob and I had discussed this year's report earlier this year, and it was always something that it was hard to always gauge where our community was based off the Infinite Dial report, because, like Rob said, it was usually like 1 or 2 slides, and the slide that they encompassed the information that pertained to us as far as growth in our community and stuff really was like very broad information. So it was always hard to gauge. Only thing you could really gauge was just, okay, this year we were at 13%. The year after that we were at 12, and you can just see the fluctuations. So I'm not gonna lie, like early this year, I thought the number would have grown because of the COVID situation and how many Black podcasters people jumped into podcasting last year, or over the course of the past year. And it actually had went down, and it was, Rob and I have talked about it in depth, and he helped me change my perspective on certain things. But to have a report like this, I think this is a great start. There were, for me, some places where I think they could have delved a little bit deeper, but again, this is a start, so I can't complain. Like, we actually have something that we can now utilize and really help not only ourselves but the community as a whole go in a direction and go in a better direction in regards to what our podcast listeners, what our communities are looking for, what they want and stuff like that. So I think it's a great opportunity. I'm gonna move forward on the slides. Again, this is the report. We're just going to go through this. We're going to just really discuss it. So I'm not going to go too in depth in all the slides and everything. If you really want to see the report, it's free. It's on the Edison Research. If you're a member of the Black Podcast Association, I actually uploaded it to the group on Facebook, so you can go deeper into the file, the file section of the group, and download it for yourself. Somebody did ask a question: what did you want me to go deeper on the report? When we go further in this conversation, I'll definitely touch on that, because last night Afros and Audio had a conversation about this too, and I expressed some of my views there. So I'll definitely repeat those here. But excuse me. So is there any particular slide anybody wants me to go to, or any particular area that that was of either interest or you had concerns or anything like that?
There was one. I'm just trying to skip ahead to see that one that I actually had tweeted and put in the Facebook group while we were watching Edison go through this report. And I think it's the one where it says podcasting is increasingly diverse. Podcasts give access to brands, highly available audience. Black voices matter. Black podcast advertisements work. It was kind of just a slide that was a collection of all the stuff that had happened. But the big takeaway for me, and I can't remember, like, I'm looking through, I can't remember exactly which slide this was.
I think it's towards the end, though.
It was the one where it said that Black, people who listen to podcasts, Black podcast listeners say that if they are listening to shows with Black hosts, that they are a little bit more in tune when they hear voices that sound like theirs, when they see faces that look like theirs. That was the gist of it. I can't remember exactly what slide that was. I'm trying to go back. Oh, go back one. Everybody. Go back one.
This one?
I'll find it because I have them all clipped here. I won't hog the conversation. I'll go through and I'll look at it.
I don't want to give nobody a seizure going through all these slides so fast.
Okay, so it's the one that's like 59% of Black.
I think I just saw that. Oh man. Hold on a second. This Adobe Edition, this Adobe PDF format thing is a little annoying.
But yeah, it basically says 59% of Black monthly podcast listeners agree that they would listen to more podcasts if there were more podcasts with Black hosts. And I think this goes to a conversation, Corey, you and I had a little while back where, there is always going to be, some folks out there. Well, why do you have to have a black podcast? Why do you have to have a Latino podcast? Why can't you just be Americans and just have a podcast for everyone? And the real reason for that is because that's not how America works. We have been, segregated since the inception of the country into different communities. And although there has, is it better today than it was, 400 years ago? I'd say probably, yeah. But we still have our own, groups that we kind of resonate with and you feel more comfortable with. And, there's a reason, for that. We have been generally segregated like this, for the country's entire history. So it only makes sense that if you are from a particular group, and this is not just about race, it's just about, groups that you affiliate yourself with, you're going to feel more comfortable listening to folks that are from that same group because there is a common point of view. There's a common culture, that you would have. So this was the one I'm like, finally, we can actually see this in print and put this to someone. Now, I always say that when it comes to anything that has anything to do with statistics, you always have to take a grain of salt. They looked at 2,500 users, and people will tell you one thing in a survey and then actually do something else with their dollars. That has definitely been the case. When it comes to surveys, we know that is the case when it comes to like political, campaign type profiles. You'll say one thing and, then vote a completely different way. But this is at least a start to where you're saying that, 6 out of 10 folks who listen to podcasts say, if the hosts look like me, I might listen more. That is super impressive to me, in this particular time. I know in the last year and a half that people have been starting podcasts like crazy. This is a thing that tells our community that, hey, there's a reason why you should be thinking about launching that show right now, because if you do it and you get in front of your community, chances are they're going to listen to you more so than if, a host did the same type of show that didn't look like you.
And I also think, to piggyback on that a little bit in regards to representation, that there is this vernacular that the media likes to portray in regards to Black people. There is this type of stereotypical characteristic, ratchet, ghetto, living in the hood. And we all know the Black population is made up of just as many different variations as any other race within this country and within the world. So to have a podcast that you are relating to for somebody who doesn't have that particular Black speech, that is just talking like they're just talking. There are so many people that have said to me, oh, when they meet me in person, and I'm like, what you owing for? Like, why are you owing me? Like,
right.
What idea in your mind did you think that I looked like? So I think that it is very important, as Rob was indicating, about people looking like you and acting the way that you act, and just normalizing the idea that Black people are literally just people with melanin in their skin.
Right. We are not a monolith at all. There are, you walk in any barbershop, beauty shop, you're going to find a different opinion on whatever it is you're talking about from just about everybody in there, but it's going to hold a different opinion. So, the mass media generally does lump us into the Black category, but we're not a monolith. But that being said, representation matters. It absolutely does. If you see somebody that looks like you, they could have a completely different philosophical view on things, but just the fact that they looked like you might bring you in. Let me hear what this brother is talking about. Let me hear what the sister is talking about. You may completely disagree, and that may not be your thing. But if it was just someone who didn't necessarily look like you, you may have never even have stopped. You may haven't even have listened to the trailer. So there are, I think, this is just showing that it says 6 out of 10. 59%, 6 out of 10 people will look at a podcast or listen to a podcast that has hosts that look like them. That is the biggest takeaway that I had from this particular presentation.
I do have a question. I'm gonna reach it out to Stephen. Is it Stephen or Stefan? How do you pronounce it?
Stephen, but
Stephen?
I usually go by Sambaza.
Sambaza. All right, Sambaza.
Yeah.
because we have a unique perspective from Zabaza because he's kind of like in our group, he's our bridge to the podcasting market in Africa. Now I know this particular report was really geared towards United States, Black African Americans and their listening habits. But do you find the same kind of? Does this also apply to where you're at in the space in the African podcast space?
Yeah, it pretty much does. But yeah, when with regard to this, I'll say I want to put my hat towards the United States, because in Africa I haven't gotten a report like this before. So I would have to go searching for it and then get that status. But
All right.
as of it's really impressing that you could have gotten all this information, and that we can dissect it today. But it's pretty similar when you talk about Africa as a whole, and having podcasters come together and listen to podcasts, because as you said, it's emerging. It's unique in its own way, and I really cannot delve in that because
Right.
I haven't done more research on that part. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't mean
Yeah.
to put you on the spotlight. I just wanted, because that, like you said, it's an emerging market, and representation on that side matters too. But I know, I didn't know if like it might be like with tribal affiliations or country
Oh,
or stuff like that. Does that play a role in that or?
yes, definitely. So if you break it down to the African context, like say for example, if you come into Kenya, we have like 42, I want to call them dialects.
Right.
So that in itself can change the whole atmosphere in podcasting, depending on who comes into that sphere. Now it depends on the amount of people that are educated on podcasting, and how many you'd have who are interested in podcasting, or who have access to podcasting. Some communities are like pastoralists. You'd hardly get pastoralists listening to a podcast because they're really out there. You're not going to have the time, or um,
Okay.
it's not something that's in them to listen to podcasts. So you have that variation where it'll change when it comes to dialects, and I can hopefully say that it will probably be the same with each and every country that you come across in Africa, if you're to break it down by country.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. Where we left off.
I got something though,
Yes.
that I wanted to talk about. The age. When you look at men and women, gender and age,
Do you know what page that is?
44%. It's a composition of
Oh, what page
Black
on the
monthly
report?
podcaster listeners.
You know what page on the report it is?
Oh man, I
Um,
wish I did. Let's see. It's
Next
almost
time I'll be more organized, people.
no, no, no. You good. You good. You good. Um, it's not past. Let's see. It took a time to whatever.
Chart page 9, I think is.
Yes, page 9 of 48.
Gender and age. Yes.
Yeah. And the question I want to put out there, and maybe we can have a discussion on this: why is it that the 55 and above is still at a smaller scale? Because with me, in my mind, when I looked at that, I would say, as you grow older, there's more time. You have enough time to sit there and listen to podcasts. And when you go down the slide, there's a slide that says a lot of people really listen to it at home when they're settled, not so much in the car, but it's more like they're on the go. And as you get older, you really don't like all this too much noise around you. So I'm assuming that if the 55% would be in terms of the older generation, we probably should have more of that rather than have the 18 to 34 being the dominant. Like I said, it's a statistic, but if we just looked at that particular segment, I think that is a little bit telling.
I wouldn't want to put the stereotype out there
Hmm.
that the older demographic is less technically savvy, but it's a true stereotype. The older demographic is less technical savvy. I can kind of speak to that because I'm part of it. I'm pushing 50. So a big part of this is that even though a podcast itself isn't social media, one of the things that this report actually highlighted for African Americans is that one of the biggest ways to get your podcast listened to is to actually put it out there on social media. So once you get out of Facebook, and there are many different reports, I don't have one in front of me, but there are tons of reports that just show the demographics of people who use social media. When it comes to a demographic of like 45, and I'm going to go 45 and up, it is almost exclusively Facebook. And I think one of the issues with Facebook is that they have taken so much of their organic opportunity to get in front of your potential audience away that a lot of folks have moved away from it. So they're pushing things out on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, so on and so forth, which all skew demographically significantly younger than what Facebook does. So I think that this statistic is just a lagging indicator. Eventually, you're going to see that demographic who are into podcasts. But like, I'll just give you an example. If I was talking to one of my aunties a little while ago, she'd heard of a podcast before, had no idea how to ever listen to one. She knew that I created a new one, and she's sending me text messages. Well, how do I listen? Where do I go? Okay, now that she's listening, I got your podcast on my phone. How do I put this on somebody else's phone? There's just a little bit of a barrier for that older demographic that they just haven't gotten hip to it yet, and it's probably more of a lagging podcast indicator. The other part of this is that when you think about podcasters in general, they are almost exclusively millennials. Now, when I say exclusive, they're predominantly millennials that are doing it. So chances are that if you are 31 and you're creating content, it's going to be roughly someone who's around your age range who's probably going to be interested in it. Corey, you and I have had this conversation, about, a show where it was someone who was 21 years old in their junior year in college, and their show was about their life. And I'm like, I've got socks older than this person. They haven't lived enough life for someone my age to be actually interested in that content. It's like my children are older than this person and they're not interesting. So why would some stranger that's younger than, some of my children be, of interest to me? So that was me being the, the grumpy old man, get off my lawn type comment, but it is a true thing. If you start seeing older podcasters get out there and put content out there, you're probably going to see podcasts start to skew a little bit older, just like everything else. So I think part of it is, I keep using this word representation. You have to actually get content out there that seniors are going to be interested in before they ever are going to just start listening to podcasts. There's got to be a reason for them to go. That content has to get created first. If anybody is wondering what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in this case, the chicken definitely comes first. You've got to create the content before any eggs are going to hatch in a demographic that isn't necessarily listening to podcasts today. That is just an opinion. This is not based off of research. This is just, I've been podcasting for 14, 15 years now. And this is just what, anecdotally I see in the industry.
I'm glad you brought that part up, because it was asked by Demetrius in the comment section. Is it more about 55 plus being less tech savvy, or the content creators aren't them and feeding them? So I think Rob answered that pretty well. I also want to add too that in our community, the popularity of podcasts is fairly recent, meaning especially since the pandemic, that just like really pushed it further. So it's like I had plenty of friends, even in my age group, who really weren't hip to podcasts in the past year. Now they've just been consuming them. So it could also be the fact that a lot of people just didn't know what they were and that they existed in the first place. So, and that's my opinion. It's not based off any fact either. So
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually work with a woman who has a much older audience, and a lot of it also too was adoption. They didn't want to. They're like, I'm not downloading Spotify. I'm not getting Apple Podcast, or they're like, I just need one place. They were like, do you have a website? Can I go to your website and I can share that with people? That's why I always say it's important for people to have websites when they're building their podcast, because some people, I know me as I get older too, like I'm like, I'm not trying to download something else. Like, is there a place where I'm already at that I can get this content sometimes? So I think adoption of new technology is a part of it too. Like, they just want to use what they're already using to access a lot of the content.
Africa, I think that that is a humongous point, and a great point. I used to say all the time, when it would come to listening to my various shows, find my show wherever you get your podcast. Well, that doesn't get a listen. If a person isn't already in the podcast ecosystem, you telling them to go get your show wherever you can listen to podcasts doesn't actually help. And one of the things that I did, and I've measured this, was I used to just would tell people, well, just go to my website and you can get the podcast there. Now I actually send them to a link tree link, or a link on my website that looks like Linktree, that'll actually say Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon Music, because you don't know where they're listening. And I want to remove any barrier to entry to someone getting to my show. So I put my stuff wherever I can put my stuff. And then I will give individual links to all of that, because that sometimes, removes the barrier. Somebody who, that they have an Android device, but all you see is a iTunes, or not iTunes, an Apple Music link. Well, I don't have Apple Music, so they never even click the link. Because that link will still take you to a place to where that Android user can listen. But if they don't have that knowledge to know that, you could be missing out on opportunity there. So as I was saying, I think that, demographically, it is twofold. Part of it is less tech savvy. The other part is that it's got to have content out there that's created for those folks. And then you have to do an effective job of marketing and getting in front of them, and literally hand holding them and getting them onto your screen.
And I just want to add to that I think this is also a good opportunity, because somebody mentioned them asking about a website, right? I think that's also another reason why podcasters should have a website. So for those people who a website is the best accessible point of entry for them. So I think that's also important to add. I guess we're going to any other statements on this slide?
What about the male to female?
Oh, so I thought that was interesting, because when I saw this, it made me laugh, because I already knew this, because the makeup of the Black Podcasters Association is more female than male. I think I don't know the reason why. I couldn't tell you the reason why. I think it's interesting. I think it has to go into the slide of when they talk about the most popular formats like music and entertainment, like comedy, and what was the other one? It was like an entertainment one. I think that might play a role in it, but um anybody would like to chime in, because I thought this was real interesting.
I thought it was interesting only because the top 3% of podcasters are all male hosted, which is so ironic to me with the large population of listeners being women. And I actually thought that the men percentage was going to be less. Because I feel like that women are content consumers more so than men. Again, not statistics, just opinion. But being a woman of 43 years, life experience has shown me that. So I just found that it's really interesting, again, that women are the majority of the consumers, yet we are the least represented when it comes to getting the most financial gain from podcasting. When it comes to getting in the top higher percentage of podcasts that are seen and heard and listened to. So I just thought that was interesting.
Now, earlier, I'm glad you brought that up, Bethany, because earlier was asked what were some of the things that that I had kind of issues with this report. I think that question should have been asked further, right? That I think that's where some of these areas where they were doing the data, I think the questions should have gone a little bit further deep. Maybe they did and they just didn't release it. They just putting it out here in a broad sense. Maybe it's a vehicle for them to use to get their services. I don't know, but I would have loved to understand, especially in our community, why this is like. What are the motivations? Like asking them maybe, well, why? You know, I don't know. I'm just to go off the top of my head. Maybe like, why do you think this, or you guys know what I'm saying? It's like I would just like them to go a little bit like a step further, just so we can have a little bit more clarity on why there's this disparity, because
Okay.
it is interesting to me.
Well, here's a tidbit that is that may be of interest. So in this report, it's saying 56% of Black listeners are women. But if you go to you take demographics out, if you're just talking about podcasts in general, it overwhelmingly skews towards men. Bethany, as you were saying, the top 3% of podcasts are almost dominated by male hosts. So this is a thing to where I believe that when you look at the industry as a whole, it still is male skewed. Podcasts are a technical thing. Tech, unfortunately, like I said, I don't like the stereotype, but right now, the way that the world is that tech does still skew, towards men, even though that, those numbers are changing. When it comes to the African American community, however, I think what you have started to see is that there are a lot of African American women who have started businesses, who are really, truly into entrepreneurship and are open to having, communication. Like, okay, I want to go listen to this sister because she is, doing this business that I'm interested in. I want to find out everything I can from her, because she's successful at it, and I want to go and apply some of that to my business. So I think when you look at why why our demographic skews more towards women, is just because you have more women who are interested in that level of, home business, entrepreneurship, getting out of the 9 to 5, going into your own thing. In our community, that skews more towards women. So the content that's being created is going to skew more towards women. Therefore, you're going to see a bigger number of women listening to podcasts, at least right now. I think over time, that's probably going to change and average out at some point. But, I don't really even see it as a bad thing, because sisters right now are really getting down with all of this entrepreneurship that the brothers haven't caught up to yet. That's not a stereotype. That's just a fact. Go to a conference. You go to any Black entrepreneurship conference, it's going to be 70% women in there, unless it was a conference directed at men.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rob and Bethany. So we're gonna move on. I know we skipped a couple of slides. Is there any particular slide anybody would like me to jump to, or any particular talking point they would like that they noticed, or you got to get your insight on this report?
I would like to talk about marketing and the importance of, the trust, know, and like factor, and purchasing from not only Black podcast host sponsors, and where our Black dollars should be going to. Because Corey, you and I touched upon this a little bit in a private chat that we had. But even though we are consuming all of this content, it is very hard to get the conversion of people purchasing from the sponsors that are paying these podcast hosts. And if we can kind of increase the amount in which we're purchasing from people that we are getting free content, I feel like that it would be more of an incentive for more Black people to have podcasts, as well as get paid and try to create some sort of livelihood. When I work with my clients, I tell them podcasting isn't going to get you rich. What it's going to do is it's going to open opportunities and doors for you. But if there was a way that we could get that monetary value to subsidize the fact that we're giving all of this free content out, I just want to see an influx in our Black dollars going to the podcast that we're listening to through those sponsorships.
Yes.
Can we start a movement for Black podcasters pay Black podcasters or something? Maybe that will bring some change to us.
So, sorry.
I think, one of the things that has to happen here is that a lot of times, and this is just from my experience, what I've seen is that particularly when you're dealing with a Black owned company, even if that company is doing quite well and has a marketing budget, you have to, in many instances, prove to them or actually get them to even think about podcast as a marketing opportunity. They're not even thinking that, I've never thought about a podcast. They don't know how to value that. because they haven't dug into these numbers. But part of it is because we haven't seen a report as thorough as this. And this is not the, like I said, it could be significantly more thorough than it is, but we haven't seen anything that's come close to this. We looked at 2,500 African Americans specifically and wanted to find out what they think. So I think a part of what has to happen is that, I've always said this when it comes to marketing: stop trying to convert those who don't already, agree with you. Go to those who agree with you and try to, get them to convert. It's a lot easier to do. The problem in our community is that we just haven't gotten to the point that where there is a critical mass of businesses who are already using podcast as a mean of advertising their business. This report's going to go a long way to to buttress that, to actually help make that better. But I think we're just still early in the game for our community, to where we're not just going to a marketing department that already advertises on podcasts. We're going to a marketing department, and you've got to not just try to sell them on you. You've got to try them to sell them on marketing on a podcast in the first place. And every time I've done this, they have no idea. I mean, there's no clue. If they've never thought about it, they've never thought about it. So they have no idea what advertising rate should be. They don't know how to actually measure success from it. So I think that part of it is just that we just need to grow in the industry more and actually get Black owned businesses and businesses that are absolutely catering to our community to be up on the game, so to speak, of using podcasting as a monetization method.
I think that's where I think this part in the report was really important, when they were talking about the ad content from non-Black creators and Black creators, and they showed the difference between how the most likely category, that there was a shift when the advertiser was a Black. I'll show the next page. Compared to ads on content from non-Black creators, with hearing ad from a brand from Black creators make you more likely listen. Creators make you more or less likely to consider the brand, recommend the brand, purchase the brand, and spend the brand. So it shows that our community is more when the face of the brand or the face of the product looks like us, we're more apt to support that brand than our other counterparts. So I think that's where it goes in line too. And I think that's always been a problem in marketing for products towards Black people for a lot of companies, is trying to find that that path. We see it all the time with different, this is a whole nother conversation, but it's always been hard for them to translate into our mediums that are directed more towards us as far as marketing goes. That's always been what I've noticed and what I've heard from people inside of, that do marketing and stuff like that. And that's one reason why it's important for us in the diversity conversation to be at these companies. I mean, like how Gucci dropped the ball a couple of years ago, and then they had to bring in Dapper Dan to help, to help fix that problem that they had, where with that shirt or whatever that got out there.
I was gonna say that was a ploy. That wasn't. I mean,
yeah. I mean, we know
that's
the other part too, right? I think that's the other part too with marketing, is they got to realize that. I think you said it the other day, right, Bethany, when we were talking on Clubhouse. Like we could spot it a mile away. Like we know when you pandering, and we know when you're trying to hustle us, versus when this is an authentic push towards getting our dollars and getting us involved. So I think that's also key, and I think that's what a lot of marketers. I think that's the good thing about this report that I really like, is that the marketers, it gives the marketers now a better understanding of how to deal with Black podcasts and their listeners.
I think that's a great point, Corey, because from a marketing standpoint, I've always heard that you cannot measure what you cannot count, and what you haven't counted doesn't count. So if you're going to a Black owned business and they've never done anything with podcast, and you can't show them really, really effective numbers of how your podcast is increasing the bottom line for other companies that you have dealt with, then just saying, I got a podcast, this stuff really works, doesn't really count for them. They actually want to see, I want to spend $500 here. How's that spend going to make me $1,500 by the end of the year? We need to be able to show that. And I think that because we're still early in the game, we didn't talk about just how big the jump was from 2019, 2020 until this year. And you were right, Corey, that the pandemic has significantly, bolstered that, in my opinion. But, Black folks wasn't really out there listening to podcasts like that
All right.
just a year and a half ago. This is a new thing. So I think what part of it is going to have to be is that folks like us are going to have to keep, hitting that cowbell and keep telling folks, it's like, no, you need to understand, if you get in front of a podcast that has an avid listenership and you want to put your product in front of them, this stuff works. They're going to need to see not just a report that says that people are going to spend their dollars if their hosts look like them, but they actually need to see the numbers where it has actually happened. So I just think that, we as a community are just kind of a little bit behind that, that indicator that you will see with the podcasting industry as a whole, because we're talking about podcasting, for African Americans, like it's brand new. It isn't. Podcasting has been around since the early 2000s. We're just now getting hip to it. So it's just all these metrics are kind of a lagging indicator is how I see them. And what we have to do is really get out there, ring that cowbell, and try to, show these businesses that, hey, this show increased this, company's bottom line by this. When we can put those metrics in front of companies, one thing I've learned is that business owners either are really good in math or they have really good accountants who are really good in math. And they can see that, okay, well, 2 + 2 = 4. And if I can, increase that, well, 4 + 4 probably equals 8. So, once we get to where they can see the numbers, not just the statistics, I think that we'll see a boom in Black podcast advertising.
I want to just add on top of, I'm sorry, you can go Africa. And then
Yeah, I was going to say my experience has been different. So my day job is specifically in advertising, specifically in entertainment. And I think a lot of the issues that we've run into with Black podcasters is that they didn't even know that there were opportunities. So I specifically used to work with TV studios and movie studios. So when certain movies were coming out and they wanted a Black audience, they're like, how do we reach these people? And their issue was there weren't enough Black podcasters that they were aware of that they could find to tap into. So we would have to start introducing them like, oh, did you hear about this show? Or what about this show? Or we would present to them like, why don't you partner with some people and create a new show? So like, for example, I think Crystal and I think it was Hey Fran, they created a podcast for Insecure when it first came out called Insecurity. And they pay podcasters, like, we'll give you $20,000 an episode to develop a podcast around this content because we know that you can bring the Black users in. So I think a lot of it too is just resources and knowing, you don't necessarily have to approach a product where you have to scale up, their revenue. It could be something that's more in tune where I feel like a lot of us are already doing entertainment where we can align with other entertainment brands and just bring people into the fold that way. So it's interesting to hear these different perspectives of people's experiences with monetizing and advertising.
I see what you just said, Africa, as an organization or a company that already knew the power of podcasting, and they just couldn't find the demographic they were looking for to advertise on podcasts, as compared to the company that has never thought about advertising on podcast and have to be converted over to thinking that, oh, podcast is a way that I can bolster my bottom line, and here are podcasts that meet my demographic where I can go. So, I don't think that there's like a disagreement. I just think there was like a, it's this and that,
Right.
type situation to where, I would love to have, companies who are already up on the game of how they can advertise on podcasts come to me. That makes my life a lot easier, because where I've spent the last 10, 12 years is going to organizations and not just trying to, as I say, get them to advertise on my show. Is to actually get them to understand that advertising on podcasting is a viable marketing effort. And I think that that's where, a lot of breakdown, comes in. But, the point you make about a lot of podcasters not even knowing that there are opportunities out there for them, that's a big part of it. Corey, you've talked about pod fade a lot, in the group, and a lot of folks, they fade out before they ever even get to the point of where they're trying to get an advertiser. And I know that this is not this topic of this discussion, but in my opinion is that if you're going to build a podcast and you ever in your life think that at some point you're going to make $1 from it, then you need to start that stuff before you ever record your first episode. Like I said, that's probably for a different conversation. But I think that, the big part is trying to get podcasters to think about the advertising opportunities that are there for them before they even start, so that they're not, well, I'm going to, as soon as I get to 10,000 downloads a month, then I'll start, thinking about advertising. You might fade out at that point, because it takes a lot of work to get to 10,000 downloads a month. It takes a lot of work to do that.
I wanted to add too, since we're talking about podcasters and figuring out opportunities, I think from the Black business point of view, this is a great opportunity for them as well, because we see here by this report about the brand engagement, the purchasing of the brand, and that for Black small businesses, they should be also looking to seek out podcasters that are in line with what they're doing, so that they could utilize this advertising paradigm to help increase their profits, help increase their brand. So I think one of the things I really liked about this report is because it almost kind of falls on us as Black podcasters or people in the industry to try to bridge this gap and help get people out there in our community to know, like, listen, here's a great platform that you can get on low and sometimes a low barrier of entry, right? You could work out, as a podcaster, I can negotiate with businesses and I can dictate, even though a lot of these corporations right now are trying to dictate the Apple, what I call the Apple iTunes format, or the YouTube click, where you got to do all these clicks and get all these milestones to reach just a penny or a couple of dollars, right? Where it's an opportunity for us as Black podcasters to actually go in. And I think this goes back to what Sambaza said earlier about us having an organization or having a collective that comes in and says, hey, we have a new way of you maximizing those small advertising dollars that you're using to get your business off the ground, to get your business into the market of your own community that's willing, that we have the statistical data to show that they are willing to support it, as long as they know that it's there. So I think from a business point of view, as well as from the podcaster point of view, we got to figure out a way to bridge that gap and create a way to connect small Black businesses to these podcasters, to create another form of monetization that's outside of the generic scope that we see in a lot of groups. Well, how many downloads do I have to do to be able to make this money or get sponsors, when we should be doing this at the beginning of our podcast, at the start of our podcast? Similar with Africa saying, you have these companies that are saying, I'm willing to pay you to build these podcasts as a marketing tool, as a marketing funnel for my product or my service or whatever it is I'm trying to do to target your community. So it's a great opportunity. There's a lot of money to be made, and this report to help me see, like, okay, there's different things out there. There's different ways we could try to finagle some of this money out of people's pockets to help us in our podcast community. So I think it's really a matter of just taking this information and really trying to look at it outside of the box. Sometimes we all run businesses, we run our podcasts, we get so caught up and so the blinders come on and you're so focused that sometimes we don't take the data that we have in front of us and say, hey, well, how can I use this to take a different approach? And I think that's one of the things I love about podcasting. And I tell my clients, this is your podcast. How you want to operate is how you want to operate, right? How you want to deal with advertisers is how you want to deal with advertisers. Of course, sponsors are going to kind of come in and say, hey, yo, this is how we do things. This is how we want to do things. But you can, just because they're putting money in front of you does not mean you have to take that money, or you can negotiate it. Maybe there's something that they'll be willing to give up and you're willing to give up in order for that partnership to work. So that's why I like this. That's one of the reasons why I'm glad we have a report like this now, because it can help us bridge so many other areas into podcasting.
And as someone who has a podcast and had a sponsor before we even recorded one episode, I think what you said is really, really important. It's all about that, finding the company that you want to work with and starting that engagement and that conversation. Because if they already know the product that you're going to be creating in that podcast, and it falls aligned very much with what they have as a company, that is going to break down any barriers if you don't have one download. And that's kind of what we did. You have to cultivate a relationship with these companies from the very beginning and have a contact that you're engaging with in a regularity. And that is going to want them to approach you about having them on your podcast as a sponsor. And sponsorship doesn't necessarily always have to be dollars. It can be percentages off of products that you purchase that at the bottom line is saving you money. It can also be engaging with other podcasts and pod swap. I feel like that the Black community isn't aware that pod swapping is how you get your podcast heard in a lot of different audiences that you would have had no other reach for had you not done an advertisement for another podcast that, again, aligns with your podcast and you're introduced into their audience. So there are so many different ways that the Black podcasting community can engage with each other and share audience, share data without necessarily having to swap money in order to do that. If you're just starting out a podcast and you're doing it independently, if money is an issue.
I got a question though. And this goes to Rob and Bethany, since you guys talk about advertising in a more detailed perspective than I have gotten into advertising. Do you think that if we had an awareness campaign to tell businesses or people out there, like pod swapping and do all this and go by the percentages and all that, kind of like get an awareness to most of the businesses that are out there that would be interested in podcasting, and maybe approach them as the Black Podcasters Association and say, okay, this is the Black Podcasters Association. Maybe we do an awareness campaign. They come in, maybe do a Zoom meeting with a couple of businesses and explain to them what we are about. And then maybe with that, it creates this conversation where now they change their minds regarding to podcasting, and they look at the array of podcasts that we have on what we talk about, then say, oh, this is what you have. Maybe we can pick a couple and then see what it can do to our business. And it will, if it's successful, then hey, it sets them up to be our messenger to other businesses to say, hey, you know what, we tried podcasting with a couple of podcasters who are Black podcasters, and this is what they in turn did to our business. So this is what kind of profits they brought into us. Now, here's the question: do you think going as a collective or a single would be much more better? Which one would you prefer? What would you have preferred to do?
I think, Simbozo, what you have just described is the definition of what the marketing arm of a podcast network does. Because ultimately, when you have a network of, let's say, 25 podcasts and an average of 10,000 unique listeners a month for each one of those shows. Well, when you go from a marketing standpoint to a company, you're not talking about just the 10,000 of one. You're talking about the 250,000 of all. And then, because that is, you have 250,000 listeners now. We're all thinking, well, all of those shows, all 25 of those shows may not be the demographic, but the number is what got you the meeting. And then you can talk about, well, specifically, these 4 shows are right in your alley. And, these 4 shows might be able to get you 50,000 unique listens to your every month. So what you're talking about is purely, I don't want to say purely. It is a type of podcast network. I've been part of them. I have done things independently, but I think that is what you are describing. And yes, they absolutely work. I don't want to say most, but many of the biggest podcasts are part of a network. NPR, all of NPR shows, they are some of the biggest podcasts on the planet, but they are all under the NPR umbrella. Gimlet Media, they have some of the biggest podcasts on the planet, but they're all falling under that Gimlet Media umbrella. So when that salesperson, because they literally have a sales team that goes out to organizations and tries to sell, their ad run to those organizations, they're not doing it as just the nod. They're not doing it as just I can't even think of the name of some of them right now. The names are escaping, but they're not going to them just as one big podcast. They're going to them as, we are this big podcast company and we can bring this total number of unique listeners. And here specifically are the ones that we think would, be involved in your environment. So that was a long way to answer your question with, yes, that works.
Bethany, do you want to add to that, or
Sure. And if you don't want to join, or if you don't have the availability to join a network of that scale, like Airwolf or Stitcher or NPR. If you are trying to do this individually, again, I think it's really important to do research and look at the people that you're reaching out to. Make sure that their message coincides with your message, your values, and your beliefs. And then reach out and start creating that bridge of connection. And do that with many different companies that you typically purchase from, because if you're already purchasing from them, you can provide data that you've spent such and such amount of money on their products. And if you like their product, a lot of the people who are listening, a lot of people that are in your audience, they most likely will like the products that you're using as well, and kind of use that as a persuasive technique in order to get them to sponsor your show, in order to get them to start listening to your show, even if they're not going to sponsor. If you're reaching out to them and you're sending a link to your episode, 9 out of 10 times they're probably going to listen to it to see what you're about. So even if it doesn't become a partnership immediately, just bridging that gap and getting that interaction and continuing with that interaction in a positive light it pays itself in dividend. And that's with anything. Consistency is with anything.
And I think to add to that, from the independent podcaster perspective, you know, Bethany, I think you said this, you don't always have to change money at first time you talk. You know, in a lot of ways, I almost prefer an affiliate type situation to where I'm going to mention your product with a host read ad in the middle of my show, and I want to give them a unique URL or a unique code to go to. And the company that I'm dealing with, that I'm doing that advertisement for, they only pay me if someone purchases via that link. And what I have found is that that can actually be significantly more lucrative than trying to get them to, before you've even shown them whether or not your ads are going to work, to you know, to try to actually, well, give me money today and then we'll see how it works in 3 months. It's a lot easier. Don't do anything for me today. You guys already have an affiliate program set up. Just create a unique link for me. So, you know, if you're acmecompany.com, do acmecompany.com / the name of my show. Make that link for me, and anyone who buys through that link, then, you know, that's how we do business. And those type of situations, I'm telling you from personal experience, they can be significantly and extremely lucrative. So sometimes you just have to think outside the box. You have to think of different ways to entice these companies, because when you're asking for money, that just automatically puts a barrier up. They want to see your numbers. And here's another thing. Like I don't mean to, you know, just dominate the conversation, but a big part of getting advertising, you know, you're going to go to a company that's going to spend money on you because of who your audience is. You need to know who your audience is before you start having those conversations. Like I get into conversations with folks and say, well, tell me who your podcast is for. And in the first 4 or 5 words, it's like, you don't know who your podcast is for. And if that is you, then you're not ready to go out and do an advertisement yet, because when you're going to trade an ad for, when you're going to put an ad in your show and they're going to give you money for that, they want a return on that investment. So you need to know who is your audience. You've probably heard about creating a customer avatar or an audience avatar. You should have someone in the back of your mind. You've actually given a name, you know, their age, you know what kind of job they do, you know what kind of clothes they wear, you know what they listen to, you know why they listen to you. You want to have that so specific that you can take that to your advertiser and it's, oh yeah, this is exactly who buys from us. That removes a barrier to them giving you money, because they now know, well, I know who your customer avatar is. We know who our customer avatar is. They seem to be the same person. Maybe now we can do some business.
I want to that's something I'd work on with people in the beginning. I think you should be doing that before you even launch your podcast. Yeah. You should figure that part out. But just so people know that actually Edison Research actually has a free document template where you can start to get that kind of feedback and that kind of demographics. I'm actually going to share the template inside of the group in our file section. So probably at the end of this conversation, I'll do that. But they actually have a free one if you need a place to get started. Because I know for a lot of people, myself included, when I first started my business, I didn't know. I was like, well, how do you do this? How do you do that? I had the privilege of being like you, Rob, in the tech space and learning in school about user stories and stuff like that. So for me, that was my point of reference of identifying the three type of listeners that I wanted, or the three type of clients that I wanted to work with, and then I reverse engineered it from back there. But they actually have a template that you can use to start, and I do advise people to at least take a look at it. If you want to use the whole thing, use the whole thing, or take what you need to figure out. But also, there's also a part where if you want to be seeking advertisers, we have to and we have to start taking ownership of ourselves as well as a community in which we do our own homework and research and put a little time and effort. It's okay if you don't know. It's okay if you don't understand, but you have to start the legwork yourself. And then, there's books, there's YouTube has a ton of information. There's plenty of websites and blogs out there as well. And then once you figure out what you do know and what you need help with, then you can reach out to people that can help you with those specific tasks, because you should have a plan before you even start addressing advertisers, which I think this report is good for helping our community to start doing. You can sit down. I know for me, I looked at this and I was like, because I was already starting to pivot my business towards utilizing businesses and entrepreneurs utilizing podcasts as part of their brand message, brand messaging or lead funneling and all stuff like that. This helps me when I'm dealing with Black businesses to be able to explain to them how podcasting works and how they can utilize podcasting or podcast shows to help get their brand out there within their own target communities that they're looking for. So I want to move on from this, but before I'm gonna stay in the monetization portion, but just to let everybody know, Africa had to leave. She has to go back to work, so she took out her time to come join the conversation. We're definitely probably gonna have more conversations based off of this report. It just gives us so much information of so many different topics we could talk about. But one of my concerns, and I might be the contrarian here on this, was this page of which of the following ways have you supported creators or hosts of the podcast you listen to. So this was 2 pages, and I'll go through both of them real quick. So for me, I had a problem, and I think this is where I think this is where they could have, maybe if they possibly have, but they could have delved a little bit deeper into the mindset of why some listeners think this is support or not supporting and stuff like that. Or as you get further in the list, you start seeing them talking about actually the financial support of podcasts, and the numbers change drastically. I would have asked questions like, why don't you support them in a fiscal manner or monetary fashion, just to get an idea of what's the motivator, or what are the issues that Black podcasters have, in order to try to get their communities or their follow listeners to be more engaged in things like Patreon and those type of service, or joining their communities if they're on Mighty Networks or one of those types of platforms. But I thought, here it says 50% following the podcast host or creator on the social media. 49 was following podcasts for free on a podcast service like Pandora, Spotify, or watching live stream events like this one. And then you see the numbers jump down from 45 to 32% when it starts getting to supporting other projects endeavors. 29% were buying merchandise, subscribing to paid ad-free podcasts. As you see, the numbers just start to get slower and lower, especially when you get to monthly subscriptions. So I wanted to ask you guys, do you have an opinion, or do you have a view on this, on why there's such a disparity, and why does our community think that just hitting like on a post or attending a stream is considered support, when a lot of people who are doing podcasts are really, for a lot of them, it is a financial burden, because it's just so expensive to produce and maintain and to keep a podcast going, which is one of the other things that I try to target when I talk about pod fading, and why I have those real conversations when I meet with potential clients and say, hey, listen, before we even get started, we got to talk about your budget and what your plan is, and what your fiscal responsibility to your podcast really is. And my personal opinion is, I think a lot of podcast listeners in our community don't understand the financial cost it takes to keep these shows that they enjoy listening to running. And that might be on our part as podcasters or people in the podcast industry. Maybe we're not communicating that message properly. Just asking for somebody to join, to support you on Patreon without, like if you like watching PBS will tell you, yo, this money goes to this money goes to that, this money goes to this, and letting people understand that if in order for me to keep this going, I need your support, whether it's $2 a month or 50, whatever the price range you decide for yourself. Is it something that our community is just something we don't do, or is it just something that where maybe podcast listeners aren't understanding this part and podcasters aren't communicating it? Is it like a twist in the message? Is that the right way to say it?
So
You want to go first, Rob?
no,
or-
go ahead, Sam. Go ahead.
Okay.
I've been dominating conversation. I'll let you talk.
Nah, not really. y'all been we've been okay. Um, I think it's more of how remember perception, and then also um, giving people what their value, what value are you getting out of this, um, especially when it comes to you have the free option, whereas you have to pay something. You know, convincing somebody that you have to pay for this and the value of it because you're paying for it is more than just getting it for free. I think that's where we are kind of have to start the conversation, right? Um, Economics. Are we? Is it economically viable for somebody to come and pay you at with Patreon as opposed to just going somewhere and having to listen for free? So with most of, and I'm going to bring in my African hat in it, with most of the African podcasters, right, which comes up different. Their budget is just, I get a phone, a simple phone, smartphone, and I talk in there and create a podcast. Mostly it's usually going to end up being video generated kind of podcast. So with that, they toss it over to YouTube and try to get monetized that way via YouTube's way of monetizing, right?
Right.
So it removes the burden off of the person who is watching it to now to just watch it for free, and then the more the likes, the more you're going to be able to get paid. However, or the more listens. However, remember, you or even Corey, you've said it, it's still disadvantageous to us. Now, when it comes to, I guess, um and for me, this is going to be personally for me, for when it comes to me, I'm looking at, if I want to give you value, I want to have you get something, like for example the branded t-shirts, Sambaza t-shirts. I would rather you purchase something that you will wear or it'll be of use to you, like a mug, something that will be around you that will, you'll feel that, okay, I did make a purchase and it did help me. Now also that comes with cost. How much is it that you're going to pay, and how much margins are you going to make out of it, so that you're not going to lose out in the end as giving the item almost or even sometimes free of charge. That's what I wanted to put in.
Yeah. Thank you.
So here's my thought on this. This is just an opinion. It is my opinion. It may not be shared by many, but my opinion is that it is not the burden of your listener at all to figure out how to support you. It is your burden to figure out how to put content in front of your listeners that make them want to support you. And semantically, they sound similar, but they're very, very different things. It is never incumbent upon your listener to, let me figure out how I can support this show, because if they've got to figure it out, then you're dropping the ball in a lot of places. I've personally done this. I just, Corey, I just started a podcast back at the end of the summer. Before we did the first episode, people were asking for a Patreon. Didn't even think about setting that up. It was like, wait a minute, I got to go set a Patreon up before I even have the show, because folks who heard the pilot episode, they were wanting to support the show before we even decided for it to be a show. That's not their responsibility. It's my responsibility to have thought about that and say, oh, you know what? Folks may want to support this show. Let me go set up a Patreon. Let me go set up buy me a cup of coffee. Let me go set up all the other things that we can do. We have a logo. Let's go set up and allow people to buy hats and t-shirts and mugs and all that kind of stuff. That is your burden to figure that kind of stuff out. I am a big fan. There is I don't know if you call it a white paper or a manifesto, but it's basically 1,000 true fans. If you can get 1,000 people who are truly into whatever it is that you're doing, you can probably make a full-time living, or maybe not full-time. You can make a really good living off of 1,000 people who are truly interested in doing the things that you need to do. But once again, it is not their responsibility to figure out how to support you. It's your responsibility to put content in front of them so that they want to support you. Like I said, they sound similar, but they're very different things. You've got to do that level of work. So, a big part of this, I see folks who, well, how do I get people to find my show? And it's like, okay, where do I go to find your show? And it's like, well, you don't have a website. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have a website, but you need to have at least a home base where you're trying to get someone. And I say, well, have you created an email list? Corey, I've actually asked this in the group before. Have you created an email list yet? And, the people that I remember that answered the question, no one had actually done it. And some of the answers were like, oh, I'm going to try to get this many people on Facebook first, or I'm going to try to get this many people following me on TikTok first, or I'm going to try to get this many people following me on Instagram was probably the number one thing. And here's the thing, you don't own any of that stuff. So, algorithms can change. Like, you're trying to get to 10,000 people on Instagram before you set up an email list, and Facebook controls exactly who sees your stuff when you put it on Instagram, because they're going to make money for you. Remember, when you are using a free platform, you are not using them, they are using you. So, so things like, when I say you've got to get your ducks in a row first, set up an email, something that you own. People, I asked the question before, what would you rather have? 10,000 people following you on Instagram or 100 people following you on email, who have given you permission to drop stuff in their inbox that they will see whenever you want. And almost always folks are going to say, oh, I'd rather have the 10,000 people on Instagram where you have zero control over who sees what. So a lot of this, as far as monetization is, you've got to think about these things. There are processes to it. There's a science to it. There is a lot of stuff that goes into making a podcast profitable as compared to just making a podcast. You want to make a podcast, pull your phone out, record, don't let the audio suck, and have something cool to say. That's what a podcast is. To make that into a business, there's a lot of other things that you need to think about. And I think a lot of times, and this is where Podfade comes in, folks they're recording and they're recording and they're recording and they're editing and they're editing and they're editing and they're putting out this content, and they're putting out all this content, and no one's listening to the content. And then they get frustrated, they get fatigued, and they just get to the point to where I can't do this anymore. And you really never gave yourself an opportunity to monetize your podcast, because those thoughts didn't come before you actually started creating a podcast. Like I said, I don't mean to be on a soapbox about that, but there are a ton of things. There's a ton of strategies that you need to think about when it comes to the overall monetization of a show. And just hitting record is the start. Just hitting record is a big enough issue for a lot of people, but it can't stop there. You've got to hit record, and you also have to think about, once I've hit record, how do I promote? One of the things that, I don't see people doing in podcasts a lot, they don't promote their old shows. It's like, if you have an old show that's hitting, it's one thing if it's a news show, so you can't talk about news that's 8 months old. But if it's, a topical item and that show was hitting, you don't always have to create a new show. Go back and hit that last show. Just change the intro on it. Cut it up a little bit different. So there's just a lot of those kind of things that are the business side of podcasting that I think a lot in our community need to think about. And part of the problem is that they don't even necessarily know that they need to think about it. So they've gotten to that point of frustration before they even knew that they needed to think about these other things. And I think, Corey, that's where folks like yourself and folks in this group can actually help the community understand that hold on a minute. Don't just put out 75 shows and you're only getting 10 listeners. Let's figure out how to get more than 10 listeners before you've put out show 76. Those kind of things. Once again, I don't really mean to be on a soapbox, but there's just a lot. I'm passionate about this stuff. There's a lot that you need to know beyond just hitting record when you truly are trying to monetize your show.
So it's fair to say, oh, sorry, Bethany, I'll let you. No, so basically it's really what I was saying. It's the messaging, how we're going about seeking support. Like I really like that statement you said about basic. What did you say? I don't want to misquote you, but basically
it is not your listener's burden to figure out how to support you. It's your burden to figure out how to get them to want to support you.
So it's
Thanks,
really
Andy.
the podcaster from the podcasting point of view. We have to figure out how to get that message across, or set that system up where we really analyze how do we want our listeners to support us and give them the opportunity to support us. But we have to give them, like Sambaza said, I guess it's the value proposition, right? You got to give them, you got to prop the value there for them to feel like they want to support this because it's necessary for them to support it, or they just feel very committed, like the Tribe of a Thousand, which people should read. It's pretty long, but it's really good. So and it's one of the things I have my clients read before we even start working together, so they can understand where the path we're going down. But I think so. It's really more just how we're messaging, the message we're sending to our listeners.
Mhm.
It's almost like an entitlement I hear sometimes from well, I built this and people are listening, so they should be supporting me.
So
Right.
And also, I do want to say that it's so much more simplistic than people are giving it credit for. If you're strategizing because you want to monetize your podcast, make sure you're saying in the very beginning of your podcast, hey, if you're looking to support me because you love what I'm providing for you, don't wait till the very end when nobody's listening
Right.
anymore. When people are, that's so many people do that. They put that in their outro. Say it from jump. Here's where you can support me. Here's where I'm offering my merchandise. Here's where you can sign up for my Patreon, and also make it accessible and available. If somebody is listening at that moment and they're like, I love this so much, I want to give to them for whatever reason, make sure you have that information in your show notes. Make sure you have that information on your website. Don't make people hunt down things in order to give you money,
Right.
because they're not going to do it. If we just have this idea that most people are lazy and just spoon feed them
no offense.
what you want them to do, like, just do that.
Yeah.
So in order to have the strategy, it's important, but it's also very important to make it very simplistic and very easy for them when they are ready to take that to the monetary level.
Bethany, that is a awesome point. You have to ask for what you want. If anyone has ever listened to any NPR show, they ask you for money at least twice, sometimes 3 times before they ever get into the meat of the show. Because when you listen to an NPR show, it seems like every month they've got some type of fundraiser going on. You're going to hear about that. Then you're going to hear about how to support the show in the show. And then when the host actually starts talking, they're going to tell you again. And it's like, tell me what you told me, then tell me what you told me again. So you've got to put that out there. I have personally been, someone who hasn't done that. And I can tell you, because I now try to count everything with my show. If I say, here's how you can support us on Patreon, or I will talk about a conversation that we had in members only content, very early on in the beginning of the show. By the next week, by the next time we record, there may be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 new patrons, because they heard about it. They heard what the benefits were, and go, I want to be on that, as compared to getting all the way to the end of an hour show and, oh, I forgot to say this at the beginning, let me go put it in. So something I'm starting to do now, I'm actually giving myself my own trailers at the beginning of shows, so that I can go and I can actually ask for it. And you cannot be ashamed to ask for it, because basically people who ask get, I remember reading a study, and this is years ago, so I'm certain that it hasn't changed, about how much money professional beggars actually make. We're not talking about folks who you might think they're homeless, but they might live in a crib that's an awful lot nicer than you, because they're making tens of thousands of dollars into the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, standing around asking people for money. But how do they do it? They ask for it. They don't generally get upset when you say no. But but it's like, if you're in Times Square and, you're actually out there, panhandling or whatever the case is, and you don't get stopped by by 50, you can make really good money doing that. I'm not saying that what we're doing is similar to that, because we are truly providing a service to people. So that's the thing, you cannot be ashamed of, I'm putting this service in front of you. You're telling me that you like it. Okay, well, here's how you really can tell me that you like it. Support my show financially so that I can do these things and even take it to the next level. And you just got to be intentional about that. I cringe every time when I ask people, well, do you have a Patreon? Do you have a buy me a cup of coffee? Do you have a Cash App or something that you asked for at the beginning? Oh no, I want to wait until I get to this number before I do that. Well, here's what you've done. You've trained that number of listeners to never expect that you're going to charge them for anything. So when you try to come in and start monetizing after the fact, you may actually have people that you've trained to, well, this is all free content. Why would I ever want to give you money for something I've been getting for free for the last year or 18 months or however long it took you to get to that point? So I always tell folks, if you believe that you are ever going to try to make any money, regardless of whether it's a hobby podcast or something that you want to eventually do for a living, if you want to do that at some point in your show, you need to think about before show one and build that into your plan. And I've just seen show after show after show that has been significantly more successful because they're thinking about that stuff up front. And it does not take a lot. I can tell you from personal experience on shows that I've worked on shows that I listen to, that they have under 1,000 downloads an episode, but they might be making $1,000 a month. You just never know. So don't be afraid to ask.
I think training them is very important because sometimes too, a lot of people in our community, when you start to try to monetize, it might come across as all of a sudden scammy or this is what you was about. And it's almost like you blindsided them. And it's like, well, I mean, I not even just in our community, just in podcasting in general, because I know there was a real popular one I love that I would listen to for free. And then and of course he would ask for donations and let you know that this support helps to pay for the podcast and keep it going and stuff like that. And then he just completely privatized the podcast where you only get it went from a 2-hour podcast to half an hour. I haven't listened to it since because that was my go-to podcast, when I'm traveling on a bus or traveling to Manhattan or whatever on public transportation, I would listen to it. And then all of a sudden he just flipped the script and privatized everything. And then he gives you these little clips, these snippets to try to drive you to purchase, and I was like, well, that for me, that left a bad taste in my mouth, right? Because for years you've been giving us this free podcast. I guess the community wasn't supporting him as much as he wanted to. And now he completely flips it. And he's like, you just pushed away so many of your loyal listeners. God, like I would get mad when he didn't put it out on the day that it always comes out on, because for me, that was my work week. I'm downloading all your episodes, so I have my travel schedule behind your podcast. So I think that's important. I think that's a really good point in that you made about training your listeners from the beginning to expect this or to expect whatever it is you expect, right? Whether you want to monetize or not. And I'm not just talking about monetization. I'm just talking about in general. Just you wind up training people, right? They expect certain things from you. They expect a certain format, and they expect a certain level of consistency from you. So if you start, I mean, I had to write that down because I didn't even think about it that way. So now I'm going to try to figure out how to add that to my repertoire, to my toolkit when I'm helping clients trying to figure out monetization. Because we shouldn't be, I mean, what they say? A closed mouth doesn't get fed, right? If you don't ask, you're not going to get fed. So it's the same principle. But I want to move on from this because somebody in the comments a while back did ask, and then I know you guys have times, and you spent a lot of time in this conversation, and we can always open up the floor for another conversation in the future if you guys would like to come back, or if any other members would like to join in on a conversation. The door is always open. But somebody asked about the topics, which I thought was really interesting as well. And from a statistical point, I think if you look at it from a certain way, you might get upset, like, oh my God, it's all just the stereotypes, right? Black people all they like is entertainment, right? You see the comedy, music, true crime, sports, TV, movies. Then the numbers start to dwindle down as you go into other portions. For me, I thought this was important because we like to hear that podcast, the market's saturated, right? Now, if you're only targeting Black listeners and you're in the comedy space, I might tend to agree with you on that. Like, I won't say the market's saturated, but I might just say the competition is a little bit harder to attract those listeners that like to listen to comedy podcasts, right? But as I went down the list and I started seeing all these other topics, like, I'm a big science fan and all, so I was a little disappointed when I saw science at the bottom. But for me, that's an opportunity to get your podcast in a market that's apparently there because 13% of listeners said they listen to science podcasts, and actually get your footing in there and build a real true brand and possibly help expand that genre to a more broader base, and you got the market share, right?
I do have to say, Corey, I was side-eyeing you because I just this year won an award for comedy. So I was like, what's he going to say about comedy podcasts? Hold up. What are you going to say, Corey Gumbs?
I'm going to say a lot of people ain't as funny as they think they are.
Well, my award says I am. So. But I think that it's important because Black people have always gone to entertainment as kind of an escape route. I mean, that's where our songs came from. That's where all of our creativity and originality came from. So it makes sense to me why the percentage breakdown is what it is. But it also gives, like I mentioned before, pod swapping, an opportunity for if somebody isn't in the genre of comedy, but they really and thoroughly enjoy like a sci-fi podcast or a story or an audio drama, which I feel like 2022 is going to be such an increase for audio drama in the Black community. That gives an opportunity to pod swap. Say, hey, I have this demographic. It's doing really well. And I listen to your podcast and I really enjoy it. Would you want to pod swap with me? So even though the percentages look like that they're vastly different, I still feel like it's an opportunity to engage with one another in the Black community in podcasting.
Oh, I agree. I'm looking at technology down there at the bottom of that list, and it's just hurting my soul.
It hurt me too.
It's just like, oh, come on. It's just hurting my soul.
Oh, my heart. I'm coming, Esther.
But this list kind of makes sense because really podcasts have been on the come up in our community for the last 18 months. Why is comedy doing is good as it's doing? Well, a lot of comics didn't have the ability to go tour. Comics generally before the beginning of 2020, they would go to comedy clubs, do their sets, and get paid to go do that. When that stopped, they had to figure something else out. I was listening to a interview with Country Wayne. I think he was on The Breakfast Club.
Right. Yeah.
He was talking about that he was down to his last. This bro has a lot of children. He has a lot of kids. He's like, I'm down to my last $13,000 back during the beginning of the pandemic, and I got all the kids at the house, and we're just trying to figure out what we're going to do. So just to pass the time, because they're not in school, it's like everybody's bored. We started making videos. And so it was kind of almost an accident, but he started making videos. And I think he went from that $13,000 to $3 million in like 10 months from doing comedy. And it wasn't just him. You saw all kind of other, artists, comedians in particular, putting out content on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. I think like Shula King. I mean, he has blown up in the last 18 months because due to sitting in his car, making jokes about other people's memes, and folks love it. So I think that the list, particularly in our community, it kind of makes sense. Well, comedy is going to kind of be there because comedians, they saw that someone being successful with it and they really hit it. Music is always going to be there for us. Health and fitness, that is, people want to be healthier. That makes sense. Sports has always been there. So they make sense. I want to see business and entrepreneurship be at the top of that list. I want to see, for personal reasons, technology be at the top of that list. So I'm not upset with the list, but I am upset with the list. It makes sense.
I think also it's also a good way to bridge the gap, because I think of comedy and I think of science. I'm gonna use Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast. He does it. He has a co-host who's a comedian, so he could bridge that gap. He can go. He can almost go through science and the comedy genre together and intersect it. I also, what you were talking about, Bethany, popped in my head. I'm like, well, not all scientists are dull people, right? Some of them have really good sense of humors and really. So it might be advantageous for somebody who has a science podcast to go on a comedy show and actually. I mean, isn't that the allure of what Joe Rogan does for a lot of people? And then you start to see another side of these people who you would automatically think are just these. I remember I was watching before I stopped watching this show. There was a geologist tattooed up, wearing hockey jerseys, and he's just cursing out left and right. But he was also talking science and the stuff he was talking about. I was like, wow, this is real interesting. Because that's the only time I ever watched his podcast when he had scientists on there. But I think it's also an opportunity to figure out a hybrid or a mix through pod swapping, or like you saying, Rob, just it's also opportunity because our community is really just starting to get introduced to podcasting, for podcasters to say, well, maybe I'm in a comedy space, but how can I look at some of these other ones? Maybe we could do history and make it comedic, right? Not every subject in history is going to be comedic, but maybe I could put a comedic spin to it or whatever. Like what was that Comedy Central had, where they had the drunk history and comedians were going on there getting drunk and telling history, and they would act it out and it was funny, right? I'm so mad they canceled it because I used to love that show. But you can figure out opportunities that way as well. I want to just point out too, this space right here, the video game esports, is really big. It's big in our community too, and a lot of people don't know this. And their college degrees, that my school that I went to, they have a professional or a collegiate team, and there's now leagues and there's professionals. As much as us older parents may not like our kids sitting in front of the screen all day long playing video games, that might be one way your kid gets a scholarship into a really good college now, because this is a big thing. So even for the youth who might be interested in getting in our community, who might be interested in getting into podcasts, these genres is going to explode. Anime, I was into anime as a kid when it wasn't cool. It was like three of us who had videotapes and we were all sitting around and share videotapes. Now my kids are like all into it, to the point where they're trying to school me on things that were around when I was just their age. So I'm like, dude, I've been watching that. I watched that way before you did. What, Dragon Ball Z was around back? Yes, yes, yes. You know what I'm saying? And we used to have to copy each other's tapes. So I think these are also opportunities, not only for us as black podcasters, but also to get our children involved in it and create a podcast media empire, a legacy empire through our children, because they're more apt to listen to some of these genres more than we are. And they're going to be the ones who are going to have the real brands 20 years from now, because that's basically how branding works. They target the kids and then they become lifetime brand users. Um, but I thought this was really good. And I wanted to hear other perspectives, because sometimes we look at this data and, and our biases and prejudices, and, you know, I look at it and I'm like, well, this is the stereotypical stuff that they always keep saying, it's black people are entertainment. But it also helps us to see, that's why I wanted to have this conversation with other people, because then we get different perspectives. So like the pod swapping, like even for myself, I'm going to put that in the back in my mental Rolodex. So when somebody comes to me and says, I need help with this, I can figure out that another path for them outside of what I already knew. And I think I'm going to keep saying, we have to look at this data outside the box and say, like we've always done in all the other medias, when they were gatekeepers and we were kept out of it, we always had to find another way around it and think differently in order to get into it and capitalize and make money off of it. So that's my soapbox.
I wanted
But,
to add something here,
Mhm.
which I think maybe it's coming from me, uh, being African and having lived here. There is we have different nuances when it comes to when we have conversations, and I'm able to understand that because I've lived here for a while. There's still some degree of issues or challenges that I have when it comes to pod swapping. And maybe that's a conversation we will probably need to have with more of African podcasters, and then kind of sit down and do a collective, because I really find it hard to sit down and get a podcaster that we can work together. I'm not saying that you guys are not able. I'm not able to work with you guys, but it's more to, I have to really be comfortable. And I guess it goes both ways, that you have to be comfortable with this person. Because I mean, if I came to you, Bethany, on day one and said, "Hey, Bethany, can we pod swap?" You'd be like, "Okay." And have you listened to my podcast? Have you done this? Yes, I have listened to your podcast. And then I'll be like, "Okay, what are we going to talk about?" And pick up a topic. Usually that's where the whole basis of the challenge starts from. How can we merge? And also with the topics, what kind of topics can we talk about? um maybe this is out of this. I think we should kind of sit down and have a maybe lengthy conversation regarding to pod swapping.
We can definitely have a secondary conversation, but I thank you for that, Samantha, because when I speak of terms of pod swapping, I am speaking of a 1 minute advertisement for you do a one advertisement for my podcast and I do a 1 minute advertisement for your podcast. So what that could look like, it could be scripted. It could be myself talking to my co-host talking about your podcast with Sabaza. And that when I speak of pod swapping, that's what I just speak of. There have been people who have really resonated with another podcast, and like I have Melanated Conversations. I have had the host of Melanated Conversations on my show, and the hosts of Melanated Conversations have had myself and my co-host on their show. So in terms, that was a pod swapping, I guess. But when I speak of pod swapping, I speak of doing a 1 minute advertisement or informative but fun kind of highlight and spotlight on your show, and then you in turn do the same for myself.
Okay. I'm
Okay,
glad
I
to hear
got
that
you.
too. Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
All right.
because that's what actually, if you guys want to know a fun fact, that's what made the basis of my show. Somebody went and talked about my podcast, did a pod swap on my podcast, and mentioned it on her podcast, and it, it, that's what made my direction of the show be what it is today. Because they just highlighted on what she thought my show was, and there we go. History was made.
All right, I think we're definitely going to examine that topic down the road at some point and have a conversation about it. Also, Simbaza, like you also having a conversation in the future about that, that gap that you're talking about in the space of African podcasters, especially being, being from there and being here, and how we could bridge that gap as well. So I definitely wanted to, because you guys had a talk at the Afros and Audio Festival that I thought was really really good, and I think a lot that conversation needs to happen more. But we've I've occupied a lot of you guys' time. I know we have other things. It's Friday and it's the weekend before Thanksgiving, and people have a lot to do. So I really appreciate having you guys here and enjoying and engaging in this conversation. And there's so much more information in this report that we could actually sit down and have another, maybe more direct conversation about specific slides or specific topics in this report. But I think for Edison Research, this was a really good first try in this space. I'm hoping, and I don't know their plans, and this is just me speculating, that they start to reach out to more Black podcasters and Black podcast listeners to figure out how these reports can really help us and help the industry as a whole understand this market, and really quantify some more data points and stuff like that, so that we can get a more robust a viewpoint of Black listeners, and just what it means in general for the podcasting industry as a whole, as well as our communities. Um, Again, so thank you guys for your time. Thank you for being here. Uh, if
Yeah,
you're not
well,
a member of the yes,
before you get to the advertising part, I just want to get a quick thing out here. Since we're going to Thanksgiving, right? Before we go, starting from Corey, then Rob and Bethany, then I guess I'll end. What's your favorite dish that you like on Thanksgiving?
oh me, I'm gonna keep it real with you. I wait for this day once a year, right? So, and I guess I'm a traditionalist. For me, it's got to be the sweet potatoes with marshmallows on them and stuff like that, stuffing and mac and cheese. If that's not there, we have a huge problem. I'm not coming to your Thanksgiving.
It's all about the dressing and cranberry sauce for me.
Cranberry sauce, and it has to be cranberry sauce that I make from scratch with orange rinds. Like,
Bethany's bougie. That's so bougie. That's real bougie.
I'll go with the pies. And my wife really makes the cakes, so I'm really like a cake person. So yeah, I always jump on the cakes. But everything else, yeah, you say it. Yeah, I dig into it.
All right.
Yeah.
So if we don't speak again all together collectively, have a happy holidays. Whatever it is you celebrate, why you celebrate it, or whatever. That's no big deal. But enjoy your time with your family, and I wish you guys a happy holidays and a good weekend. And again, we really appreciate having you here for these conversations. This is what we're about. having members in our group come in and give their insights and collaborating and working with each other. So with that, I'm just going to end it, and I guess I'll do some advertising, closing stuff. I actually have a reel, so I'm just going to play that and then be on my way. All right, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
All right, guys.
All right.